How could the thoughts of a single man born more than 2,300 years ago bring the progress of an entire species to a grinding halt? How did one philosopher convince the world that heavy objects must fall faster than light ones, a claim so easily disproven that a child could have done it by simply dropping two different stones from their hand? This is not a story of a conqueror with armies, nor a tyrant with a crown. It is the story of an idea, a beautiful, elegant, all-encompassing idea that became a perfect prison for the human mind, a cage so comfortable, so logically complete, that humanity locked itself inside and threw away the key for nearly 70 generations. The man was Aristotle, tutor to Alexander the Great, a mind of staggering breadth. He sought to build a system, a complete explanation for everything the eye could see and the soul could feel. He catalogued animals, pondered ethics, defined drama, and invented formal logic. But it was in his vision of the cosmos, of physics, that he forged the strongest chains. He declared that the universe was composed of 4 terrestrial elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Each had its natural place. A stone being made of earth sought the center of the universe, which was, conveniently, the earth itself. That is why it fell. Fire, in contrast, sought the heavens, so it flickered upwards. It was simple, it was intuitive, and it required no messy, hands-on verification. Why bother with experiment when pure reason could unveil the universe's deepest secrets from the comfort of an armchair? Aristotle's method was deduction, starting from what he deemed self-evident truths and reasoning his way to conclusions. The world, he argued, was knowable through thought alone. This was the most seductive poison ever offered to human intellect. It flattered our vanity, telling us that our minds were the ultimate measure of all things. In this grand system there was no room for the radical, unsettling ideas of others. The atomists, like Democritus, had dared to suggest the world was made of tiny, indivisible particles moving in a void. An elegant theory, but one that implied chaos, randomness, a universe without purpose. Aristotle dismissed it. His cosmos was tidy, purposeful, and reassuringly finite. The earth sat unmoving at the center, the crown jewel of creation, while the sun, moon, planets, and stars, made of a perfect fifth element called ether, revolved around it in flawless crystal spheres. It was a cosmic architecture of profound beauty and absolute certainty. This illusion of complete knowledge became the system's greatest strength and its most terrible curse. It didn't just provide answers, it made questioning seem unnecessary, even foolish. Why seek new truths when all the truths were already catalogued? The path to wisdom was not to look at the world, but to read Aristotle. He gave humanity a blueprint of reality that was magnificent, coherent, and almost entirely wrong. The ideas of thinkers like Pythagoras, who saw the universe in the language of mathematics, were sidelined. Mathematics was for counting and measuring, not for understanding the essential nature of things. The physical world, for Aristotle, was about qualities, not quantities. It was a world of purpose, of telos, where everything strove to fulfill its inherent nature. An acorn's purpose was to become an oak, a stone's purpose was to fall. This teleological thinking was deeply satisfying to the human psyche, which constantly seeks meaning and intention in the world around it. It felt right, so the trap was set. Aristotle did not seek truth, he built it. He constructed a cathedral of thought, complete with soaring arches of logic and stained glass windows of metaphysical certainty. It was a fortress against the unknown, a shelter from the terrifying complexities of an indifferent universe. And humanity, weary of chaos, eagerly sought refuge within its walls. The first victims were not people, but possibilities. The possibility of experiment, the possibility of mathematical physics, the possibility of a universe far stranger and more wonderful than Aristotle could ever have imagined. His legacy was not just a set of incorrect theories. It was a mindset, a deep-seated conviction that the ultimate authority was not observation, but the received wisdom of the past. The stage was set for an intellectual tragedy on a scale never seen before or since. The mind of one man, brilliant and flawed, had just laid the foundation for a 2,000-year-long dark age of the sciences. It was an intellectual triumph that would soon become a global catastrophe. And one must ask, is it the lie itself that is so dangerous, or our desperate need to believe in a simple, all-encompassing story? The philosopher offers you a key to understanding everything, a beautiful and complete system. The skeptic tells you that there is no key, only an infinite series of doors to unlock. Who do you trust? The one who gives you order, or the one who offers you chaos? Let us know in the comments below. The system's power lay not just in its intellectual appeal, but in its timing. It was born at the very moment a new kind of power was reshaping the known world. Aristotle's most famous pupil was not a philosopher, but a conqueror, Alexander of Macedon. As Alexander's armies carved out an empire stretching from Greece to India, they carried more than swords and shields. They carried Greek culture, Greek language, and the ideas of their leader's esteemed tutor. When Alexander died, his empire shattered, but the cultural seeds he had sown began to grow. In the heart of this new Hellenistic world, in the city Alexander founded in Egypt, a new institution arose that would become the custodian of his teacher's legacy, the Great Library of Alexandria. It was intended to be the intellectual center of the world, a repository for all human knowledge. And for a time, it was. Scholars from across the Mediterranean flocked to its halls, poring over hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Yet, a strange paralysis soon set in. The library, which should have been a crucible of discovery, became a museum. Instead of standing on the shoulders of giants, the scholars of Alexandria chose to live in their shadows. The primary intellectual activity was not creation, but curation. It was not investigation, but commentary. And the giant who cast the longest shadow of all was Aristotle. His works, collected, edited, and systematized by generations of librarians and scholars, became the definitive word on practically every subject. To be educated was to know Aristotle. To be a scholar was to write commentaries on his texts, to debate the finer points of his meaning, to unravel his arguments. To challenge him, however, was to mark oneself as an eccentric, an ignoramus who did not grasp the master's wisdom. The very institution designed to preserve knowledge became a bastion against its advancement. The weight of the past crushed the potential of the present. The intellectual air grew stale, thick with reverence and devoid of curiosity. Within those hallowed walls, the spirit of inquiry quietly suffocated under the sheer volume of accumulated and unquestioned authority. Consider the tragic case of Hero of Alexandria, a brilliant engineer and mathematician who lived and worked in the city around the 1st century of the Common Era. Hero designed and built a device called the Aeolipile, a hollow sphere mounted on a pivot that would spin when heated water produced jets of steam. It was, in essence, the world's first steam engine. Can you imagine? A blueprint for the Industrial Revolution, existing 1700 years before James Watt. It could have transformed the world. Powered machines built cities, but it did not. Why? Because in the world of Aristotelian physics, such a device was an impossibility. For Aristotle, motion was caused by things seeking their natural place or by direct contact, pushing and pulling. The idea of an invisible force like steam pressure creating powerful, sustained motion simply did not fit the model. So, Hero's steam engine was not seen as a revolutionary invention. It was classified as a clever toy, a curiosity for temple doors and garden parties, and then it was forgotten. The blueprint for the future was right there, but no one could see it because their minds were trapped in the past. The paradox of Alexandria is a chilling one. The greatest concentration of knowledge in the ancient world served primarily to reinforce a single, deeply flawed worldview. The scribes diligently copied Aristotle's treatises on biology, in which he claimed that the brain's function was to cool the blood and that the heart was the seat of intelligence. They preserved his astronomical works, which locked the Earth at the center of the cosmos. They revered his physics, which taught that an arrow flew through the air because the air, displaced by its passage, rushed around to the back to push it forward. Each of these ideas was profoundly wrong, yet they were treated as gospel. The act of preservation had become an act of stagnation. The library was not a lighthouse guiding ships to new discoveries. It had become a fortress, defending the coastline of a small, known world against the vast, uncharted ocean of reality. Its librarians were not explorers, they were guards. And the treasure they guarded was a beautiful, intricate, and utterly false map of the universe. The Greek fire of inquiry, once burning so brightly, was reduced to a flickering candle flame, illuminating only the well-trodden pages of a single master. Soon, even that flame would be carried west, into the heart of a new empire that valued practicality far more than philosophy. This new empire was Rome, a civilization of soldiers, builders, and lawmakers. The Romans were masters of the practical world. They built aqueducts that carried water for 100 kilometers, roads that stitched together a continent, and a legal system that became the bedrock of Western jurisprudence. What they did not have was patience for the endless philosophical debates of the Greeks. They saw abstract speculation as an indulgence. They needed results, formulas, and clear-cut answers, and the version of Greek thought that reached them was a simplified, pre-packaged, and dogmatic one. Aristotle's intricate system was boiled down to a set of rules and classifications that appealed to the orderly Roman mind. His logic became a tool for rhetoric in the Senate and the courts. His categories were useful for organizing laws and military structures. His physics and cosmology? They were accepted without question, almost as an afterthought. Who had time to gaze at the stars when there were barbarians at the gates and provinces to administer? The vibrant intellectual culture of Athens, the spirit of questioning and debate, did not survive the journey to Rome. The Romans were adopters, not originators, of philosophy. They consumed Greek ideas the way they consumed Egyptian grain and Spanish silver. A figure like Pliny the Elder perfectly embodies this shift. He was a tireless compiler of information, a man who sailed toward the erupting Mount Vesuvius out of scientific curiosity and died for it. His monumental work, Natural History, was an attempt to catalogue everything in the known world. But it was a work of compilation, not investigation. Pliny mixed his own sharp observations with myth, rumour, and a heavy dose of second-hand Aristotelian dogma. He wrote of men with the heads of dogs in India and of oysters generated from sea foam, right alongside accurate descriptions of botany and mining. For his readers, and for the next 1500 years, these fantasies were presented with the same authority as the facts. He was not testing the old knowledge, he was merely collecting it. In doing so, Pliny, like so many others, helped to cement Aristotle's errors, coating them with the authority of Rome and passing them down to future generations as unquestionable fact. As the Roman Empire grew in power, the space for original thought shrank. The focus was on maintaining the vast machinery of the state, not on questioning the fundamental nature of reality. The great tradition of Greek skepticism withered. Why ask why when how was so much more profitable? This pragmatism, while building a magnificent material civilization, created an intellectual desert. There were great Roman engineers, but no great Roman physicists. There were brilliant satirists and poets, but no revolutionary philosophers to challenge the status quo. The intellectual inheritance from Greece was treated like an old family heirloom, dusted off and admired on occasion, but never altered or improved upon. It was a static body of knowledge to be learned and applied, not challenged and expanded. The Latin cage was not one of oppression but of indifference. The bars were not made of steel but of a profound lack of curiosity. Then the empire itself began to crumble. Centuries of internal decay and external pressure culminated in the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century. In the ensuing chaos, libraries were burned, centers of learning were abandoned, and much of the classical world's knowledge was lost. The intricate, nuanced works of the great Greek thinkers, including Aristotle himself, largely disappeared from Western Europe. What survived were often fragments, summaries, and third-hand accounts, the intellectual equivalent of ruins. The complex arguments were gone, leaving only the stark, categorical conclusions. Aristotle's carefully constructed system was reduced to a series of simplistic, easily memorized dogmas. The fall of Rome did not just plunge Europe into a political dark age, it completed the process of intellectual decay. The rich tapestry of classical thought was shredded, and only a few durable threads remained. These threads, stripped of their original context and complexity, would be picked up by a new power rising from Rome's ashes. And in the hands of this new power, Aristotle's philosophy would be reforged from a cage of indifference into an iron prison of faith. The surviving fragments of his work would travel a long and winding road, preserved not in Rome, but in the flourishing cities of a new and vibrant civilization, the Islamic world. While Europe descended into a period of fragmentation and intellectual decline, the flame of knowledge was passed to the Arab world. In cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba, a golden age of science and philosophy dawned. Arab scholars, deeply curious about the world, sought out and translated the great works of Greek thought that had been lost to the Latin West. They were fascinated by Aristotle. Thinkers like Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, and Ibn Rushd, or Averroes, did not just preserve Aristotle, they engaged with him, writing extensive commentaries, debating his ideas, and using his logical framework to build their own philosophical and scientific systems. For a time, it seemed as though Aristotle's work might become a catalyst for a new scientific revolution, centuries ahead of its time. But it was not to be. In a twist of fate, this meticulously preserved and richly annotated legacy would find its way back into Europe, primarily through the reconquest of Spain. And when it arrived, it landed like a meteor in the intellectual landscape of medieval Christendom, an explosion of knowledge that would have the most profound and catastrophic consequences. The European mind of the High Middle Ages was utterly unprepared for the sheer intellectual power of the complete Aristotelian system. It was a revelation. Here was a comprehensive, logical, and detailed explanation of the entire universe, from the movement of the stars to the nature of the human soul, all from the mind of a single pagan philosopher. It was intoxicating, but it also posed a terrible threat to the established order of the Christian Church, whose worldview was based on Scripture and the writings of the Church Fathers. This pagan system often contradicted Christian doctrine. What was to be done? Into this intellectual crisis stepped a Dominican friar with a mind as vast and systematic as Aristotle's own, Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas embarked on a monumental project to synthesize Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology, to create a single, unified system of knowledge that would encompass both reason and revelation. He sought to baptize Aristotle, to make the pagan philosopher a servant of the Christian faith, and he succeeded with devastating consequences. In his Summa Theologica, Aquinas masterfully wove Aristotle's ideas into the very fabric of Christian doctrine. The result was a philosophical and theological edifice of breathtaking grandeur and terrifying strength. Aristotle's geocentric cosmology, with the Earth at the center, was no longer just a scientific theory. It was a reflection of God's divine plan, with humanity as the focus of creation. His physics of natural places and teleology became an expression of God's purpose-driven universe. His biology, his logic, his metaphysics, all were absorbed, sanctified, and given the ultimate seal of approval. The unholy alliance was complete. A scientific error was now a religious dogma. A philosophical system had become an article of faith. From this moment on, to doubt Aristotle was no longer a simple act of intellectual disagreement. It was heresy. It was a direct challenge to the authority of God and his church. The intellectual prison now had walls of stone, bars of steel, and a new set of guards, armed not just with arguments, but with the power of the Inquisition. The search for truth had become a mortal sin. The Church had built its cathedral of faith upon the foundations of Aristotle's universe. It was a perfect marriage of convenience. Aristotle provided the intellectual framework, the how, while the Church provided the ultimate explanation, the why. Together they created a closed system, a bubble of certainty that no uncomfortable facts could penetrate. For the next 3 centuries, this scholastic system dominated European thought. Universities became centers for training students in the mastery of Aristotelian Thomistic thought, not for questioning it. The ultimate intellectual achievement was to stage a disputation, a formal debate, where clever arguments were used to defend the established dogma, never to challenge its premises. The world was a finished book, written by God and explained by Aristotle. The only task left for humanity was to read and to believe. What a terrible choice for the thinkers of the age to face. What would you have done? Would you have chosen the comforting embrace of a system that had all the answers, even if they were wrong? Or would you have risked your soul to follow the evidence, wherever it might lead? This was the choice. Faith in a perfect system, or reason in a chaotic world. Share your difficult choice in the comments, but even in the most secure prison there are always those who whisper of the world outside. The monolithic dogma of scholasticism was not as absolute as its defenders believed. Within the walls of the universities and monasteries, quiet acts of intellectual rebellion began to stir. These were not revolutionaries seeking to tear down the system, but cautious reformers trying to patch its most obvious flaws from within. They were the first heretics of reason. One of the earliest and most tragic figures was Roger Bacon, a 13th century Franciscan friar. Bacon was a man ahead of his time, a tireless advocate for what he called scientia experimentalis, experimental science. He argued that true knowledge could not come from endlessly rereading ancient texts. It had to come from observing the world, from measurement, from mathematics, and from testing ideas. He dabbled in optics, chemistry, and astronomy, and even predicted the invention of telescopes, flying machines, and motorized ships. But his insistence on experiment over authority was seen as a dangerous novelty. He was accused of practicing magic, and his works were condemned. He spent the last decade of his life in prison, silenced by the very institution he sought to enlighten. Bacon was largely a solitary voice, but by the 14th century the whispers of dissent were growing louder, especially at the universities of Oxford and Paris. At Oxford, a group of thinkers known as the Merton calculators began to apply mathematics to the study of motion. They developed concepts like velocity and acceleration, creating abstract graphs and equations to describe how objects move. They were not performing experiments in the modern sense, but their work was a radical departure from Aristotle's qualitative, non-mathematical physics. In Paris, thinkers like Jean Buridan and Nicole Oresme took an even bolder step. They directly attacked the heart of Aristotelian dynamics, the explanation for projectile motion. Aristotle had claimed an arrow was pushed along by the air. Buridan found this absurd. Instead, he proposed a revolutionary idea, that the bowstring imparted something he called impetus to the arrow, an internal motive force that kept it moving until it was overcome by air resistance and gravity. This theory of impetus was a direct ancestor of the modern concept of momentum and inertia. It was a profound crack in the Aristotelian edifice. Buridan even applied it to the heavens, suggesting that God, in the beginning, had imparted impetus to the celestial spheres, which had been moving ever since without the need for angelic movers or other divine interventions. Nicole Oresme went even further. He argued 2 centuries before Copernicus that it was entirely possible that the Earth rotated on its axis once a day, and not the entire heavens. He systematically refuted all of Aristotle's arguments against a moving Earth, and concluded that there was no way to prove which was truly in motion. While he ultimately deferred to the authority of Scripture and concluded the Earth was stationary, the intellectual damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been planted. These were not yet acts of open war, but of intellectual sabotage. These thinkers operated from within the system, phrasing their radical ideas as hypothetical possibilities or logical puzzles. But every carefully worded argument, every forbidden question, was a stone being chipped away from the prison wall. The price for this courage was high. Careers were ruined, thinkers were censured, and the fear of the Inquisition was a constant shadow. but the work had begun. The heretics of reason, in their quiet studies and hushed lecture halls, were preparing the ground for the earthquake to come. They were sharpening the tools that would one day be used to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. The earthquake arrived in the 16th and 17th centuries. It began with a Polish astronomer named Nicholas Copernicus, who published a book on his deathbed suggesting that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the universe. But his work was dense, mathematical, and written for experts. It caused ripples, but not a revolution. The revolution needed a warrior. It needed someone to take the fight out of the dusty halls of academia and into the public square. That warrior was an Italian mathematician and astronomer named Galileo Galilei. Galileo was a new kind of scientist. He was brilliant, pugnacious, and a master of public communication. He did not just want to debate the scholars, he wanted to show the world that Aristotle was wrong, and his weapon was the experiment. The famous story of Galileo dropping 2 cannonballs of different weights from the Leaning Tower of Pisa may be a legend, but it captures the spirit of his work perfectly. Aristotle had declared that heavier objects fall faster. Galileo, whether through that public demonstration or other experiments, showed that they fall at the same rate. It was a direct, public, and humiliating refutation of the ancient master. A single observable fact had shattered a 2,000-year-old dogma. But Galileo's greatest weapon was not a cannonball, it was a telescope. Hearing of a new Dutch invention that made distant objects appear closer, he built his own, far more powerful version and did something revolutionary. He pointed it at the night sky. What he saw was a revelation that would tear the old cosmos apart. The Aristotelian heavens were supposed to be perfect, smooth, and unchanging. Galileo looked at the moon and saw mountains, valleys, and craters. It was imperfect, rugged, and Earth-like. He looked at Jupiter and saw 4 tiny moons orbiting it, a miniature solar system that did not revolve around the Earth. He looked at Venus and saw that it went through phases just like the moon. This was impossible in the Earth-centered model, but perfectly explained if Venus orbited the Sun. Each glance through the eyepiece was a hammer blow against the crystal spheres of the old universe. The heavens were not perfect, and the Earth was not the center of everything. The universe revealed by the telescope was not the cozy, human-centered world of Aristotle. It was a vast, strange, and wondrous place. Galileo published his findings not in scholarly Latin, but in lively, accessible Italian for all to read. His book, The Starry Messenger, became a sensation, but he was playing a dangerous game. By dismantling Aristotle's cosmos, he was striking at the foundations of the Church's worldview. The forces of reaction began to gather. The Inquisition, the Church's instrument for enforcing doctrinal purity, turned its gaze upon him. In 1633, the aging Galileo was summoned to Rome to stand trial for heresy. The trial was the dramatic climax of the war between 2 worlds. On one side stood Galileo, armed with his telescope, his observations, his evidence. On the other stood the full might of the Aristotelian Thomistic system, embodied by Cardinal Bellarmine and the Holy Office of the Inquisition, armed with tradition, scripture, and the power to imprison and execute. It was a contest between the authority of the past and the evidence of the present. It was a clash between the world of the book and the world of the eye. The outcome was a foregone conclusion. Under threat of torture, Galileo was forced to get on his knees and formally abjure, curse, and detest his belief that the Earth moves around the Sun. He was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. The system had won the battle, but it had lost the war. The Church could force one man to recant, but it could not undiscover the mountains on the moon or the moons of Jupiter. As Galileo was supposedly led away, he is said to have muttered, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. The legend captures a profound truth. The facts did not change just because an old man was forced to deny them. Galileo had broken through the prison wall. He had shown humanity that there was a universe outside, and he had provided a glimpse of its wonders. The Inquisition could silence the man, but it could not silence the truth. The cracks he had made in the ancient prison were now too large to repair. The final collapse was now only a matter of time. A wise man once said that when Galileo moved the earth, the walls not only of observatories but also of cathedrals began to crack. The war against Aristotle was not fought only in the heavens. A quieter but equally bloody battle was being waged over the territory of the human body. The prison of the mind had condemned the body to centuries of misguided and often lethal medical practice. Aristotle's biology, like his physics, was based on speculation and occasional observation, not systematic investigation. He taught that the heart, not the brain, was the seat of thought and emotion. He believed in spontaneous generation, the idea that living creatures like flies and mice could arise directly from inanimate matter like sweat and rotting grain. These errors and many others were picked up and amplified by the most influential physician of the ancient world, Galen of Pergamon. Galen was a brilliant anatomist of animals, but Roman law and custom forbade the dissection of human corpses. Consequently, his understanding of human anatomy was based on dissecting pigs and Barbary macaques. He then projected this animal anatomy onto the human form, creating a detailed but fantastically inaccurate picture of how the human body worked. This flawed Galenic medicine, built upon an Aristotelian foundation, became the unquestionable medical dogma for the next 1400 years. The Church embraced it, declaring his works to be the final word on the God-given structure of the body. Just as it was heresy to question the Earth's place in the cosmos, it became a dangerous taboo to question Galen's anatomy. The prohibition on human dissection continued for centuries. As a result, physicians treated patients without any real knowledge of their internal workings. They practiced bloodletting based on Galen's theory of the four humours. They prescribed useless and often harmful remedies. They watched helplessly as plagues swept through populations armed only with ancient texts and prayer. The intellectual prison had become a literal death trap. Millions perished from diseases and injuries that might have been treatable had doctors been allowed to study the very thing they were trying to heal. Progress was not just halted, it was forbidden. Then, in the 16th century, another warrior entered the fray. His name was Andreas Vesalius, a young Flemish anatomist with a burning desire for the truth. He was not content to read Galen, he wanted to see for himself. Defying the authorities, Vesalius began to perform his own human dissections, often stealing the bodies of executed criminals in the dead of night. What he found shocked him. The human body did not match Galen's descriptions. He discovered that the human jawbone is one piece, not two, as in a dog. He found that the human breastbone has 3 segments, not 7 like an ape's. He demonstrated that there are no pores in the septum of the heart, allowing blood to pass from one side to the other. In 1543, the very same year Copernicus published his work on the heavens, Vesalius published his own masterpiece, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, or On the Fabric of the Human Body. It was a magnificent work filled with beautiful, detailed illustrations based on his own direct observations. It was a revolution, an act of liberation. Vesalius corrected hundreds of Galen's errors, effectively demolishing the foundations of ancient medicine. The fight was far from over. A century later, the invention of the microscope by Antony van Leeuwenhoek would deliver the final blow to Aristotle's theory of spontaneous generation. Peering through his tiny lenses, Leeuwenhoek discovered a teeming, invisible world of animalcules, bacteria and protozoa. This unseen world proved that life came from life, not from mud or decaying meat. It was a long, gruesome war, fought in anatomy theatres and clandestine laboratories. The heroes of this war were not generals, but anatomists and physicians who dared to trust their own eyes over the words of an ancient authority. They fought against dogma with scalpels and against superstition with microscopes. Their victory gave humanity a priceless gift, the knowledge of ourselves. What would you have chosen in that dark time, the safety of a 1,000-year-old medical text or the terrifying bloody reality of the dissecting table? Would you side with the sacred tradition or the dangerous evidence? Your answer in the comments reveals more about our modern world than you might think. Galileo had smashed the celestial prison. Vesalius had liberated the human body. But the ghost of Aristotelian physics still lingered. His ideas about motion, of natural places, of violent versus natural movement, of a universe driven by purpose, still shaped the way people thought about the physical world. The final demolition of this ancient structure required a new architect, a mind capable not just of tearing down the old, but of building a new, magnificent and enduring edifice in its place. That mind belonged to an Englishman named Isaac Newton. If Galileo was the warrior of the scientific revolution, Newton was its lawgiver. He was a solitary and secretive genius who, during a 2-year period when the plague forced Cambridge University to close, laid the groundwork for a complete transformation of science. He invented calculus, discovered the composition of white light, and, most importantly, began to formulate his laws of motion and universal gravitation. In 1687, he published his Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, arguably the most important scientific book ever written. The Principia did not just disagree with Aristotle, it made him completely irrelevant. It presented a new vision of the universe, not as a collection of qualitative tendencies and purposes, but as a vast, impersonal machine governed by precise, universal, and mathematical laws. Newton's 3 laws of motion swept away the entire Aristotelian framework. The first law, the law of inertia, was the final version of Buridan's impetus theory. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by a force. There was no need for air to push an arrow, its own momentum carried it forward. The second and third laws provided a mathematical way to calculate the effects of forces. Suddenly, the entire field of mechanics was transformed from a subject of philosophical debate into a predictive, quantitative science. But Newton's masterstroke was his law of universal gravitation. The legend says he was inspired by a falling apple. Whether true or not, he made an audacious leap of imagination. He proposed that the same force that pulled the apple to the ground was the force that held the moon in its orbit around the Earth, and the planets in their orbits around the sun. It was a single universal law that applied to both terrestrial and celestial objects. This was the final fatal blow to the Aristotelian cosmos. For 2,000 years the universe had been split in two, the corrupt, changing world below the moon and the perfect eternal heavens above. Newton, with one elegant equation, unified them. The fall of an apple and the orbit of a planet were just 2 different manifestations of the same fundamental force. The universe was one, governed by one set of laws, accessible to human reason and mathematics. The prison was not just broken, its very foundations had been vaporized. The Newtonian universe was a revelation. It was a giant, predictable clockwork, set in motion by a divine watchmaker, but running on its own according to immutable laws. For the next 200 years, Newtonian physics would reign supreme, leading to incredible technological and theoretical advances. It gave humanity a sense of mastery over nature, a confidence that everything could, in principle, be understood, calculated, and predicted. The triumph was complete. The long, dark night of Aristotelian authority was over, and the bright morning of the Enlightenment had dawned. The human mind, finally freed from its ancient chains, could now look up at the stars not with mystical reverence, but with the clear, cold understanding of mathematics. The walls of the prison had collapsed with a deafening crash, revealing a breathtaking view of an infinite, orderly, and knowable universe. Reason had triumphed. The war was won, or was it? Does an idea so powerful, an idea that held the world captive for 2 millennia, ever truly die? The physical universe of Aristotle was a ruin, demolished by the cannonballs of Galileo and the equations of Newton. But an idea is more resilient than a stone wall. A way of thinking can persist like a ghost, haunting the corridors of the mind long after its foundations have turned to dust. The ghost of Aristotle was not so easily exorcised. While physicists and astronomers were building their new mechanical universe, other sciences were still struggling to escape the long shadow of his influence. His method of thinking, his core assumptions about the world, had become so deeply embedded in Western culture that people continued to use them without even realizing it. The battle was won, but the enemy's fifth column was still operating deep within the liberated territory. This was the story of Aristotle's lingering shadow, the insidious persistence of mental habits that continued to break progress in fields like biology, chemistry, and even the way we reason about our own societies. One of the most powerful Aristotelian ghosts was the concept of telos, the idea that everything in nature has an inherent purpose or goal. For Newton, the moon orbited the Earth because of the force of gravity. For Aristotle, it did so because it was its nature to move in a perfect circle. While this teleological thinking was banished from physics, it found a comfortable home in the life sciences. For centuries, naturalists viewed the living world through this lens. The intricate design of a bird's wing or a flower's petals was seen not as the result of a blind process, but as evidence of a preordained purpose. This way of thinking was a significant barrier to understanding evolution. It led to theories like Lamarckism, which suggested that giraffes grew long necks because they strove to reach higher leaves. The purpose came first. It took the revolutionary genius of Charles Darwin to finally banish the ghost of telos from biology. His theory of natural selection provided a mechanism for the appearance of design without a designer, a way for complexity to arise from the blind, purposeless competition for survival. Darwin did for biology what Newton had done for physics. He replaced purpose with mechanism. Another stubborn ghost was Aristotelian essentialism, the belief that every natural kind, every species of animal or plant, is defined by a fixed, unchanging essence. A tiger is a tiger because it partakes in the eternal essence of tigerness. This made the very idea of evolution unthinkable. Species could not change from one to another because that would violate their fundamental essence. Darwin's great struggle was to convince people to abandon this categorical black and white thinking and to see species as what they really are, fuzzy, ever-changing populations. The ghost of essentialism still haunts us today. It can be seen in our tendency to create rigid social categories and stereotypes, to believe that groups of people have fixed, inherent natures. In chemistry, the Aristotelian idea of the four elements, earth, air, fire, water, persisted for centuries in the mystical and fruitless pursuits of alchemy. Alchemists spent their lives trying to transmute lead into gold by altering the balance of these fundamental qualities long after the concept was scientifically useless. It took the rise of modern chemistry under figures like Lavoisier, who identified oxygen and proved that water was a compound, not an element, to finally lay the four-element theory to rest. Even our daily reasoning is not free from these ancient spectres. Aristotle's formal logic, with its law of the excluded middle, a statement is either true or false, is a powerful tool, but it can also lead to a rigid binary way of thinking that fails to capture the probabilistic, uncertain nature of the real world. We see this in polarized political debates, where complex issues are reduced to simplistic for or against positions. The teleological fallacy, assuming something's function is its origin, pops up everywhere, from "this medicine is natural so it must be good" to "the economy crashed because it needed a correction." Aristotle's ghost is the voice in the back of our heads that whispers for certainty, for purpose, for clear categories, for simple answers in a world that is messy, random, and complex. Demolishing the prison was the easy part. Learning to live in the unsettling freedom of the outside world without rebuilding the walls has been the work of centuries, and it is work that is still not finished. So we stand today, the inheritors of this long and brutal war for the freedom of thought. The story of Aristotle's 2,000-year reign is not merely a curious chapter in the history of science. It is a timeless and chilling parable. It is a warning. Why was his system so seductive? Why did humanity cling to it for so long, even in the face of mounting evidence against it? The answer is as simple as it is unsettling. Aristotle offered certainty. He offered a world that was finite, knowable, and fundamentally meaningful. His universe was a home built for humanity. The science that replaced it offered something far less comforting. It offered a universe of unimaginable vastness, governed by impersonal laws in which our planet is a lonely speck and our existence a cosmic accident. It took away the certainty of the prison and replaced it with the vertiginous freedom of an infinite and perhaps indifferent cosmos. The lesson of Aristotle is not that one man was wrong. It is that any system of thought that claims to have all the answers, that discourages doubt, that places authority above evidence, is a prison in the making. The scientific method, the great weapon that brought down the Aristotelian walls, is the polar opposite of his system. It is a process of permanent revolution, of constant questioning. It is built not on certainty, but on a profound and humble appreciation for human ignorance. Its greatest strength is its ability to prove itself wrong. We have escaped the prison of Aristotle, but are we truly free? Or are we constantly building new prisons for ourselves? We replace the authority of the ancient Greeks with the authority of ideology, the authority of tradition, the authority of the algorithm. The human desire for simple, all-encompassing answers is a constant and powerful threat to progress. We crave the comfort of the cage. The liberation of the mind is not a single event in history. It is a continuous, ongoing struggle. It is a struggle that each of us must wage every day within our own minds. It is the struggle to choose curiosity over comfort, to choose questions over answers, to choose the difficult and provisional truth over the easy and comforting dogma. The legacy of the long war against Aristotle is not a set of correct facts about the world. It is the staggering realization that true knowledge is never final. The final act of liberation is not to burn an old book or tear down a statue. It is to embrace an endless, uncomfortable, and ultimately glorious uncertainty. That is both the price and the ultimate reward for escaping the perfect prison. The story is over. But the choice it presents is more relevant now than ever. Aristotle gave humanity a coherent, purposeful world and 2 millennia of intellectual stability at the price of truth. Modern science took that stability away, offering in its place an eternal, restless search. So, for the future of our world, which path should we choose? The reassuring order of a grand, unifying narrative, even if flawed, or the chaotic, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous pursuit of unvarnished truth? Write what you think in the comments. This is no longer a historical debate. It's the decision we are all making right now.